So let's talk about 4 different power dynamics. There are others, but these are the 4 that we find most impactful in different and positive in different ways. So the one that most people think about is the formal. Like, as when you have formal power, it means you are a direct manager or multiple manager above people. Basically, I could fire you, right? Like, if you have formal power, you have some ability to force action with threat of termination, with threat of consequence in organizations. When people think of power dynamics, they often think of formal power as the only power, right? Or the main one that's involved. There's also, and I'm not going to be able to see chat. So Chris, if it's a question that's coming to me, can you read out the question for me? Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks. So then you have informal, or sometimes referred to, or often referred to as influence power. And influence power, okay, has much more of a dynamic of, this is somebody that has respect. This is somebody that has a lot of experience, respect, knowledge that people will defer to because, hey, they know things well. I was actually just at Agile 2022, and like, I made the joke in the room of like, Linda Rising's here. If Linda Rising talks, I just believe her. Like, it doesn't matter what Linda says. Like, the amount of respect. And as Chris kind of said, we can sometimes create people that are like heroes to us, right? And we have a bias to tend to defer and respond to what they believe is best. Sometimes that's because of expertise. Sometimes it's connection based. Sometimes it's duration based in the organization, but you don't need a formal title like formal power does to actually have influence power. The next one that I want to talk about really briefly is dominant power. Dominant power is what represents the norm, the majority. So I'm a female in tech. And I remember when I first got pregnant and coming into the office after having my son, Sean, I hated having to ask for a break so I could pump. I mean, this was 2005. I hated it. I felt like I was breaking things up. People would say, well, we're not due for a break yet. And I'm like, well, my body's saying something different. Like, but I wasn't part of the norm. I wasn't the status quo. The status quo was, we were consultants. You work from 7 to 7 and you don't barely take a lunch break, right? And because it's all billable hours. And so when the dominant is whatever's the status quo, and it can be the norm or the majority that's expected. And so a lot of times that has power because it's unspoken power often. It's just there. It's the unwritten rules that this is how we've always done it that can have momentum and power in situations. And then there is unidentified power. And a lot of people will refer to this as like the elephants, right? What's the elephant that's not being talked about? Sometimes it's the elephant that's just not transparently be talked about, like, because most elephants are talked about, just not openly in front of everybody. They're talked about at happy hour, they're talked about in private Slack channels, right? But sometimes there's unidentified power where you actually don't know. Something's off, right? Like your intuition, your guts, like something, this doesn't make sense. And so sometimes you can't even identify the source can be happening, but it's yet having an impact. So I want everybody to take a moment, and you're going to do this individually. You're not going to share it. I just want you to think about this. Oh, okay, great.
So Doug asks, how is dominant related to culture?
It depends on whatever the part of the culture that is the norm or the status quo or the majority. So for example, I have a client that had kind of what they actually often refer to as a bro culture, right? So that culture was, oh, we just hang out, we joke, we do whatever, and nobody's too sensitive, right? And so that became the norm, that became the dominant power, so that if anybody said, well, I'm not comfortable with that, it was harder to face that power because the momentum was, this is acceptable and this is the culture in the organization. Now the culture, if you mean culture by truly ethnic, regional, different things like that, all of that can come into play when it's facing dominant power. Okay, So I want just to internalize this for just a brief second. I want you to think of a current challenge at your workplace. You're not going to share it. You're not going to name names. Okay. But can you think of, is there a power that might be involved there in your challenge that you have? Maybe, maybe not. But think of a current challenge and see if you can go, wait, maybe there's a little bit of influence power going on. I don't want you to share your challenge, but in chat, can you put which power you think might be at play a little bit in there? Could be, potentially. We got a dominant, we got a formal, an influence, a formal, all the first three, all of them. Dominant, formal. Here's the thing is I knew formal power existed and was unavoidable in structured organizations. I really wanted to believe we could ignore the others. If I was a good leader, the others wouldn't apply. But the reality is they're always present. And when I think about a lot of challenges in my past or current, there is a power dynamic involved in it. It may not be the sole source of the issue. It may not be the sole cause, and there might even be relationships between it, but there's always usually some kind of power dynamic to a lot of the challenges that I'm facing as a leader, as a team member. Can policies rather than people be formal power? If it has threat of consequence of termination and like, then yes, but there's still usually it's tied to the person who would enforce those policies. So let's look at a scenario here. And let's do a little bit further of a dive into this to see if we can spot where good intentions can go awry a little bit. So I'm going to bring over here. Hopefully this is big enough for people to be able to read. Take a second, read this scenario. As you're finishing up with it a little bit, start thinking about which power dynamics may be involved and how. I think Susan already got one of them in there, but what power dynamic is in there and how is it showing up? You can go ahead and put them in chat if you spot some. So there's some formal. How's formal showing up? So yeah, Sue has a high position. And even if Sue never walks around saying, I'm going to fire people, there's still that fear there. There's still that known ability there that's going to come into play. Let's talk about some dominant. How does dominant show up a little bit in here? Yeah, there's almost that history, that expectation, the culture, the previous experience that's going, nope, I don't care what's happening right now. This is what we expect. And having some dynamics that are coming in of like, this is our history. This is what we know. I don't want to listen to something new, which is really part of the problem with dominant dynamics. Somebody highlighted unidentified. Where's unidentified coming up? Ooh, yeah, there's just unspoken things, right? There's assumptions. There's something that's not being shared fully. And then it's being shared through roundabout ways instead of directly. And the telephone game is always the best way to get feedback. Did you know that, right? Like always the best way is to telephone game anonymous. That's definitely not the best way, okay? Now I'll let you in on a little secret, although this is being recorded, so my secret's going to be out. Given a title change, slightly different, and a name change, I'm Sue. I know, it was hard to believe, but did Sue or me, did we have bad intentions? Did this leader have bad intentions? Did the team have bad intentions? Yet the problem is going to be often we get to this point and I can only own it for myself, and I'm going to own it. And I don't even have to project on Sue. I can speak for myself. When I got to the end of this, why judge me dynamic, it was super easy to feel very defensive, to feel like a victim, to feel frustration, which then causes so many people to then react stronger, to make judgments. Instead of acknowledging, as Paula said, intention does not equal impact. And intention is important. There's a lot of people that will just say impact matters more than intention. And that's true. But I also like really highlighting intention matters. Look, if Sue was coming in here trying to be malicious, trying to like be a horrible person, you got a whole different set of power issues going on, right? But at the end of the day, impact matters more. And you're going to experience the impact as the leader. You're going to experience the impact as teams. You're going to experience the impact in the system, in the organization. So it's time that we start actually just acknowledging that these power dynamics are always going to exist. That these power dynamics are something, let me blow it up just a little bit. That these power dynamics always exist. So the trick isn't trying to go, well, we're not going to have power and I'm just one of the team. Treat me like one of the team. I have an open door policy, right? Like these statements that don't actually adjust the power is to start thinking about how do we shift from power over, where we use our formal power to get action, where we rely on the dominant, to start thinking of how are we going to recognize that power exists, but do it in a way that's supportive and collaborative by using power with. So I'm going to give you some examples about how we can do that, how we shift from power over to power with. So for formal power, there's a little bit of an element of how are you going to shine a spotlight on the problem? So I hear this a lot of times with formal leaders when they're frustrated by their formal power and people are just deferring to them. Well, they won't make a decision. And Glenn, this is where we're coming in right now of how to approach it differently. Like they're like, they won't make a decision. They're not speaking up and things along those lines. Well, we don't want leaders to just fix the problem. We want them to start shining a spotlight on it. How can we start looking at it and going, how do we draw attention to the fact that if we can't share openly, how do we draw attention to the fact that what our shared goals are and what's happening and what my role is coming into it? How do we shine a spotlight on the fact that the bad previous thing, let's not just pretend it wasn't there. Let's shine a spotlight on and say, what has been the impact of that previous culture? What are things that we might have to deal with? And so in a lot of cases, formal power, acknowledging that it's there, asking open-ended questions, that's, highlighting the reality of it and creating ways to be more of a, of a way to say, I'm not just saying, hey, give me your opinions, but I'm actively kind of going, this is a problem. And I know that I'm going to, have a bearing on that because I'm the boss, right? Or because I'm the manager. And so what can, this is what I'm looking for. Versus just dismissing and validating or acting like they shouldn't be a big deal. I remember once I was telling somebody, I was trying to I was trying to give career advice to somebody and it went horribly off the rails in a great way of me realizing, oh my gosh, formal power is such a big deal. And that I was telling him, I was like, who cares about titles? Like at the end of the day, it's whether you're being challenged in your work. And I was going on, I had all these great points and he got done and he looked at me, he goes, says the person with the executive title. And then I had to stop and think about that. Like, do I not care about titles because I've had them? Do I now understand how irrelevant they are because they are a check mark, right? Like, and what that means? How does that present when I'm telling somebody else not to care about titles when I have one, right? When I have that formal power. And so it became starting to where I would really just kind of start shining a spotlight on things. For influence, one of the things that you can do is provide some balance. Now, here's what I mean by providing balance. Look, we all know the expert in areas. Sometimes you're the expert in an area. You're the person that's like rock star, amazing person that is the go-to person for that. And when you are, how do you invite others into that conversation? Are you pairing with people? Are you giving opportunities? Like, for example, one of the things that I do for meetups now is I don't accept meetups unless I can name an underrepresented person or somebody else that a new voice to also be in a meetup later. It's an opportunity that I can provide some balance, different voices out there, making sure people are seeing other people's knowledge and experience and expertise. And I have the power to provide that balance a little bit more, because when I say, hey, Chris, I really think you should check out this person, Chris is gonna, and they're new to speaking, they need that, like that opportunity with those things. But I have that power, that weight to help create some balance for helping other people to also become influential, to build those connections. One of the things that I do often at conferences, people know this about me. I don't show up with the same people at every single thing. I don't have a clique. Now I have some core people, but I don't have a clique. There's always somebody else that comes and says, hey, Tricia's coming. That means she's bringing 2 new people. Right? Like, and who are they going to be? Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I found them on my way with things. But think about it in the workplace. Are you the quick go-to person, or are you, as like Peter's saying, teaching, pairing with somebody else to help somebody else build that knowledge, build that skill? Do you know somebody that is trying to build in that area and helping them build those connections, grow? One of my favorite things to do is people are often coming to me now going, I want to start speaking. And I'm like, okay, how do I help build your connections? How do I help build that expertise and that knowledge so that I'm not just the go? Look, I know I like to talk. That's obvious to everybody. And I like to talk. That's obvious to me. But I get sick of me. Like other people need that space and that ability. And it's easy to go to the go-to person, but if that go-to person is starting to provide some balance. So I love that Chris put in here, Chris always speaks last. I actually challenged one of my leads once. And I said, don't talk until 3 people talk. Don't talk again until 3 more people talk. Because sometimes what you find, and if you're a checkmark person, I got a bonus thing for you. You can write down what you were going to say as that expertise, and then you wait for 3 people to talk. And sometimes you get to do a checkmark because somebody else said it. So not only did somebody else get some more influential power, but you also got to checkmark. I mean, that's just a win-win for days. Okay. So providing that balance is an area. Another area that you can do, especially for dominant, not that one, sorry, is expand the connections. Now, providing these build on each other and relate together. When I say expand connections, I don't just mean introductions. This was a big area for me to learn, and it's actually why I did the microaggressions course and a lot of that before, is opening a door for somebody is not expanding connection. Expanding connection means creating environments where people can collaborate together, where people are really trying to hear diverse differences and build on them. We talk a good game in the Agile space about wisdom of the crowd, and yet we're so quick to do the status quo, even us, right? Because we're human. It's normal, it's a habit, it's comfort. And so are we expanding our connections in a way that are actively trying to think about, who do I not hear from? What experience, what beliefs, what information, what content am I never aware of? And so one of my favorite things to do at conferences and things is like, who haven't I ever heard from? What topic would I normally not pick, right? What can I do in ways that builds additional data points, connections to help me see other possible benefits that are beyond the status quo? And when you expand these connections, it can be people related, it can be systems related. But I will actually say a real data point, and I did not have this as brand new information for me or for me sharing with things. Back in 2020, Agile Alliance did a series called the Racial Equity Series. And where we did a lot of open conversation communication of why, and hearing experiences of why it was difficult to be Black in our Agile community and what that meant specifically. And fast forward, out of that series, a program and a group was founded called Agile in Color, and they do a number of things. And fast forward to Agile 22. I don't even know if I can describe the volume of diversity that I saw at Agile 22 versus years in the past. I mean, I've been going since Agile 2007. The diversity it filled my soul, because the conversations we had, the dynamics, the thinking through things, like everything we talk about in the Agile space about what pure collaboration and the wisdom of the crowd can do, I got to experience this week or last week or a week and a half ago at Agile 2022. And so I think about those connections, and I was seeing CP Richardson, who was one of the founders of Agile in Color, and he went to introduce me to somebody, and they're like, oh, I've known Tricia forever, right? Like, but like these dynamics of, you're not just introducing people, but you're making them connected, right? Because then once that connection starts happening, now we're open to more, oh, well, what works for Tricia, right? Or what works for different things of what different people have in terms of needs. I wasn't always great about this personally. I always thought opening the door was enough. Nope, it's actually learning about that individual, making the connection that's necessary. And then the last area that that's really beneficial in helping to deal with power is embracing the conflict. Now, when I say, oh, go ahead.
Real quick, before you jump into that one, there was a really interesting comment in the chat from Olaf.
Okay, let me back up to it.
Yeah, he said, letting others speak is risky when the culture values talking as evidence of competence, and competence means promotions.
Yep. And so I might have used the word talking. And one of the things I like to say is engagement. Yes, I'm a talker, but I love your point here, because somebody who's not talking doesn't mean they're not engaged. And if you're valuing the wrong things in terms of how people engage, how they want to make connections, how they want to do, provide balance, that's part of that diversity. That's part of that wisdom of seeing different things that are helping for what should really be driving promotions is based on, I don't just say competence. I do think collaboration is as important as like skill competence level and teamwork with those. So I do go beyond just competence for promotions. But talking is not sometimes you're fully unengaged talking because you're doing your own thing. So talking is not the only sign of engagement, and really looking at how you're providing that balance to making sure all voices are heard and seen and valued.
Yeah, I think the timing of his comment was around the time you were saying in the providing balance section of influence. I think
that would make sense.
Yeah, I think his concern was that by intentionally being quiet and making space for others to contribute, that, oh, there could be an impact, a career impact, at least, in certain cultures, certain organizational cultures.
Yeah, and it very well may. I mean, this is one of those areas where, well, I'm not the expert go-to person. I'm not going to get promoted. And this is one of those short-sighted viewpoints sometimes for me. Yes, companies are, look, I may die on this battlefield of trying to get better leaders. Okay, I know that. But the reality is, how do you get a better product? By teamwork, not by individuals. And so at the end of the day, yes, experts are super valued in organizations and often promoted the most. I will take a collaborative team member with less expertise over a horrific person that is the best expert on the face of this planet any single day of the week, because that team will outperform that expert every single time. And but will all companies recognize that right away? No. In fact, one of my future sessions that I'm going to be doing is courageous leadership, when everybody tells you you are prioritizing the wrong thing over everything else, right? So yes, it's hard. I actually didn't get a promotion once because I didn't work as many hours as another developer. I got passed over for the lead developer because he did more hours, even though I did more work and I actually did his work. But he logged more hours. So he got the promotion. So there's the long history of that kind of bad things. But at the end of the day, what kind of leader do you want to be and where do you want to do? And so when you're shifting to power with, I'm thinking about these things to say, how do I make it more supportive so that we can really see who's helping the most with these? Or bring it up directly. Yes, 100%. So the last area that I want to talk about is embrace the conflict for this. And then I'm going to give some tangible examples even further than what we've done for you to try. Embrace the conflict. How many people have heard the statement, it's not personal, it's just business? Don't tell me if you've said it because I'm about to insult you. You are quoting a fictional movie about the mob as a business best practice. We say these things, but guess what? Here's the next secret. You're human. You're personal. Conflict is actually what helps us gain from the wisdom of the crowd. It's what helps us gain from the diversity. So if you never have conflict, you're not actually gaining any of the differences. You're not learning from them. You're not engaging. You're not building off of them. Now, conflict is not the same thing as drama. And I have a whole different, bent on that. It's not personal attacks. It's not drama, but conflict is, hey, we have a disagreement. Let's explore it. Let's dig into it, because this is where we get the good stuff. It's one of the reasons I love going to conferences, is because I'll have people like Chris Sims like, I don't know, Tricia, let's talk about that. Right. And it's not just an immediate, yes, and then we got to dig in. And then my idea from our discussion is so much better than it was to start. So let's look at a couple examples of things that we could be doing. Okay. And I'm going to throw these examples out, and I want you to put in chat on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being, or 0 to 5, almost like a fist to 5, 0 being never going to happen. I would never try that experiment. To a 5 with, I might try this tomorrow. Okay. So here's the experiment that I'm going to throw out there first. Provide space for random lightning talks that are like lunch and learns. Is this an experiment you may already be doing it, right? Which power dynamic would this help with? If you were to do this, which power dynamic would this help with? Season, that's fair. Influence and It helps to provide some of that balance, that influence. You start seeing other people for their knowledge, their abilities, their things that they could be doing that you might not even know about, their abilities, and even perhaps a little bit of dominant too. Depending on what the content of that topic is, could actually challenge some of the status quo. How about this experiment? Okay, ready? That is underrepresented people. Sorry. I was reading my own note and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Because that was a note for me, not for you. So how about this experiment where the leaders don't get to decide the projects or who's on the projects, the teams do. Now, some might say, I don't have that option, right? And that's fair. But if you were to do this, what power do you think would be coming into play here? A lot of the formal. And even some of that dominant. Yep. There's more. There's another one. Influence. Could even be unidentified too, right? I had somebody approach me once. I've created tons of tiger teams. I've created tons of the best teams of the best, right? When you need the best of the best, or you think you know the skill sets. And I created this like tiger team for the special project that we had to do. And I had another developer walk into my office, and keep in mind, I am an executive director of development. This is a fairly, like, he was like, I don't know, 4 years out of college developer, right? Not a senior, not a lead. And he walked into my office, does not directly report to me, actually was like 3 levels, skip level, right? And was not trying to be rude, but literally came into my office and said, Tricia, can I tell you something? Or can I say something? And I'm like, yes, I have an open door policy, right? I'm like, yes, say it. And he looked at me, and it was probably another one of those gut punches that I needed dramatically to have. And he said, did it ever occur to you they're the best because you keep picking them? What do you think he meant by that? What did I realize by that?
That other people didn't get the option to show that and what they could do.
Yeah. So there's some unconscious bias, definitely some unconscious bias on my part, because once I pick them, right, like now they're rock stars because they were a rock star before, that there was some dynamics of potentially playing favorites. But when you get picked for these, when you're on one of those special teams, you get all the special tools. Do you get to focus? Do you get all these conditions that help make you successful, which then helps you to be the rock star, because not only are you getting new opportunities to grow and to learn, but you're also getting like the perfect environment to do it, which then reinforces you're the rock star. And when I think back to my own career, I'm where I'm at because I kept getting opportunities, because people kept picking me. Yes, I had to work hard. Yes, I had to do things, right? But I definitely accelerated a lot of things because I got exposed to extreme programming in 1999. I was doing Scrum in 2005. Because someone chose me for that team, because they needed the best of the best. And then just while you're being told, anybody ever have somebody believe in them more than you believed in yourself? It's like it's terrifying, right? There's a lot of pressure that comes with that, especially if you respect that person. But I'm grateful for the people who believed in me before I did, because I didn't want to let them down. And I worked really hard. It made me like confident in an insecure way. I still felt like a massive imposter syndrome dynamic going on, right? But I wanted to do a good job. I wanted to excel. I wanted to succeed, which ups that game. I just was listening to a comedian that says, I never let bad comedians come up. I want you to do the best, because then I got to level up my game. And it's that same dynamic. Now, the big fear often with that idea or that experiment is, well, but what if they don't choose the right project, so you don't get the right people? Well, this goes back to do we believe in generalizing specialists in Agile? Do we believe that people are creative and intelligent? Do we believe that people can learn and grow? Do we believe in teamwork? And I'm not here to convince you if the experiments are good or bad, right? But I just want you to kind of think through them as we're going. How about this experiment? You're running a training or speaking session. It's a 2-day. And the first day stinks. You just stop the class and don't give the second day. Are you willing to do that? Yeah, this is one that I've had a lot of people stop and go, oh, what does that mean? Like that's financial or but that's part of these things that come into play with with power. So if you were to do that, what power dynamics in an organization are you dealing with there a little bit or shifting with? Now, I'm not saying you might not do a retro or things like that, but think about it like it's so much easier for leaders sometimes to say, you don't do that. But then how many things are we doing that we just keep doing it? Now we try and improve it and things like that. But there's a lot of our meetings, especially as senior leaders, that everybody else hates. And are we really kind of willing to put our stuff on the line to have that discussion, to engage? Some companies, they have if you don't find value in the meeting, leave, right? Some do, some actually say that, and you never see anybody leave because of some of the power dynamics that are coming into play. How about this one? One more. Would you be willing to increase the transparency regarding the CEO's impact on changing priorities? I like it. I'm not sure I believe all of you.
That's easy to do when you're not.
Or you all have very amazing CEOs, which now we should all share where you work for, right? But this is a dynamic that you don't always get. So this next part of our thing might be a little bit interesting as we go with this. But these are just example experiments. You could choose lots of different things. But each of these example experiments, what they do is they're trying to highlight, how do I create an environment where I'm being more supportive, being more transparent, being more collaborative, versus just pretending that the right people always have the right access, that the right people always will just speak up or be able to just deal with it or ignore it or dismiss the power that's happening. And you want to make sure instead that you're creating spaces where you're promoting it, not just saying it. You're actively promoting it and saying, how can we make this be true, right? And actively encouraging it with those things. So the last one I'm going to give to you, and we're not going to do this exercise together, but I want to throw this out there for you, okay? Chris, I'm going to go over by just 5 minutes because of the network. Is that okay?
Oh, dude, as much as you'd like.
Well, I want to be respectful of your other parts of your thing. So here's what I'm going to have you do for a second. Remember that first challenge that I had you think of, and I asked you, what's the current challenge you're facing? What's a current challenge that you are facing? And which power dynamic was coming into play? Everybody remember their challenge and their power. One of the ways to embrace conflict is owning your part in the power dynamic. Now, maybe owning your part in that power dynamic just means you weren't very open and transparent about the power. Maybe it was you avoided something altogether. you all said you challenge a CEO, but I don't know. In my experience, has that always been the case? But I had a situation where I had a boss, a formal boss, a VP, who was my first female VP. First one. I was so excited about it. We hated each other. Like, I mean, on every front, we were just not compatible. How we didn't catch it in the interview, I really honestly, almost mind blowing to me. And when I quit, she ended up saying to me, I want to give you some feedback on your last day. She has not given me feedback this entire time, and she wants to give me feedback on my last day. And her feedback to me was, Tricia, you don't know how to connect with people. Now I have a laundry list of issues, and I am happy to tell you about them, but my ability to connect, my desire, my interest to connect is actually one of my strengths. It's one of the things I'm actually willing to share and be proud of. And she's highlighting this. So here's this conflict. And my first part wanted to be just defensive and call her names. I will own that. That was my first internal thought. Okay. But I didn't do that. Instead, I sat there for a second. I was like, what's the 2% truth of what is coming into play here? And I could have spent time highlighting how I still talk with 20 of those colleagues today, and a lot of them have been through my trainings. But I stopped and went, how can I embrace this conflict and owning a part? If I had been Sue, I could have owned that I invited myself. I could have owned that I didn't share my goals as much, or what I was hoping out of things, that I was doing different things. I could have owned that I was hurt by this feedback. So in this case with my boss, I said, I can own that you and I didn't connect. The 2% truth was you and I didn't connect. So I want you to take a second. And again, you're not going to share this. I want you to be as honest as you can. And you may even have to write it down and let it sit with you for a bit. But what's your 2% truth in your part of that challenge? Has power been having an over effect and not a with effect for you when it comes to that challenge?
It gives us an opportunity to peek into the parts of ourselves that we usually can't see, which can be really, really powerful.
Which might help us understand our impact, despite our intent. It also just gives you a place to start, to move forward, instead of being frustrated by the power, to move with the power. Because you can look at yourself and see what might be rubbing the other person. Yep. Guessing most of us here are not in a position of formal power. Maybe we have some influence. Do we use with people who have formal power, dominant influence? Actually, a lot of the cases, and yes, whether you have formal power or not, many of these experiments, many of these things that I'm talking about, the embracing conflict, all of it can hold whether you have a formal title or not with those things. Now, whether or not you can choose and you have the control to do it, to do one of the experiments is a different story, but you always have the control to do the 2%. And by doing that, in a lot of cases, you're making at the minimum, the unidentified power transparent, which takes away from that power. It takes a giant elephant and makes it into a cute little smaller, more manageable baby elephant that you might actually be able to handle and deal with a little bit. Now it could still grow again. I cannot promise you that, but there you go. I like it. And no, Doug, it doesn't, it doesn't come off bad for me. Like, honestly, when I said I might die on this hill for helping leaders actually not suck the souls out of people, is a goal. And again, when I say leaders, I don't mean formal power leaders only. I mean anybody. And in some cases, sometimes the best way to help that manager is to not try and manage up, but by partnering up. I've had plenty of managers that were like, Tricia, I don't know what you're doing. I'm like, well, here's what I'm looking for. Here's what you're concerned about. Here's what I'm going to do, but I need help and support in running this experiment. Will you do this with me? And by doing that, a lot of times I'll then get a manager like, okay, now I need to know more about what you're doing because that result was awesome. and much more so than just going, stay out of my way, right? With those things. So anybody can be a leader. And in fact, sometimes right now, my hope in this world is more on those influential leaders or newbie leaders than I have in a lot of the formal leaders right now. So I thank you. I think they're going to do some more Q&A or different things as we hear. But I'm going to be uploading in chat a copy of this Miro board, so you have that as well. Okay.
Yay. Oh my goodness. Give it up for Tricia. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.